You're asking me to change who I am. He got defensive. And I said, I thought about it. I said, yes, I'm asking you to change who you are because who you are will not work in the role you want.
So, Christian, I'm really excited to be able to chat with you today. And I know we're going to get into a lot of great stuff. But I read in your bio that you are quite the athlete, dare I may say, an extreme athlete. And I always admire anyone who's done an Ironman or any kind of extreme adventuring. So, I have to ask you, what's the most dangerous thing that you have ever competed in, or a race that you've run, or adventure you've been on?
The most dangerous thing I've done is probably skydiving. I would say jumping out of a hot air balloon. That's probably the most dangerous thing because the balloon is low. The balloon is also has to be descending pretty quickly because I guess they figured out a long time ago when skydivers jumped off, the balloon was a lot lighter and it'd shoot up in the air. So now the balloon is going down pretty quickly. You're over like whatever. There's no the balloon can't be controlled to fly over a drop zone, so you have to figure out where to land. And there's no one around to help you if something goes wrong either, like in an airplane. And there's a falling sensation. You don't have a falling sensation when you skydive because your forward momentum is just translated to downward momentum. But at a hot air balloon, you actually feel that falling sensation. Plus, the ones I've done, you're super close with your parachute to the flame, like causing the balloon to go up in the air. So it's very I don't know if it's dangerous or not. I've done it like 3 or 4 times, and I'm still here, so it's not that dangerous, I guess. But it is a little bit different experience.
Well, I would never have even considered all of those precautions you have to take. That is really cool. And maybe danger is relative to some, depending on what you're getting into. I actually didn't realize I've never been skydiving, and I'm not sure I could work myself up to do that. But I never realized that you don't have that falling sensation because I think that's maybe my roadblock is the getting over that mental hump of knowing that I would be falling, but you don't actually feel that.
You only have that if you jump off something stationary, like a helicopter, a cell tower, or a hot air balloon. If you jump off a plane because a plane is moving forward, you don't have the falling sensation. No.
Wow. Okay. That's really cool. Now, I've got to ask as like a follow-up, would you prefer to jump out of an airplane next or a hot air balloon again? What was your
My
preference?
preference is a hot air balloon. It's one of the coolest things I've done because you have to be there when the balloon takes off, and you get to be part of the whole experience of them inflating the balloon, getting the balloon to altitude. Is totally quiet. An airplane is very noisy with the door open. A hot air balloon is like completely quiet and peaceful, and it's beautiful. Plus the whole experience is different because you don't jump over the drop zone. So wherever you land, you have to figure out how to get back to the drop zone where you started. And like one of the times I did it, I'm coming in and some dogs saw me and they start like chasing where I'm going to land. I'm thinking, man, I hope these dogs are nice because I'm in the middle of like Illinois in a soybean field. And I land and the dogs come up and run up to me and they got a little bit tangled up in my parachute, but they're nice dogs. So you got challenges like that. Unfortunately, I got my parachute kind of organized. I was walking on a dirt road, and this farmer picked me up and gave me right in the back of his truck back to the drop zone. So it's kind of it was a
Oh,
cool
wow.
experience. Yeah.
That's a really cool. There are even more dangers around that or precautions. I never would have thought. That's really cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. So, Christian, you have a really cool background, not just the athletic side and getting into those extreme type of sports, but you've started a business, you've written a book, and you've just got a wealth of leadership experience. So, share a little bit with us your background and what led you on that journey and what your vision is for yourself, your company, or just for the audience so that they can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, I think for me, leadership starts with self leadership. I feel like the person we often neglect leading is ourselves. And for some reason, a lot of people don't think about leading ourselves. So if you lead yourself and have some intentionality and set goals and make time for those goals, then your life can be very different, and that requires you to take ownership of your life. So for me, I've tried to be put myself in the driver's seat and practice that self leadership. and that has allowed me to start businesses. I sold a business. I'm building my second cybersecurity business. I have a team of about 20 people right now, and I have some very ambitious goals for this company. But developing the leadership skills within myself has really helped me in my business and in my life, and it's taken a lot of work. It's not like I was just born a leader. I used to be in the military, so I learned some leadership skills from there. But most of the work I did is personal development work, like undercover, revealing like the things that are holding me back, my thought processes, my habits, and understanding who I am and how to communicate and letting my ego go has made me a better leader. It's been a lot of work, and it still is a lot of work. It's some one of those things that you never quite master. At least I don't think so until until you pass away. Then you've done the best you can do, basically.
Well, I love that mindset, Christian. I'm glad you shared that with us because that's part of the purpose of this podcast is that we're never done. We're not done learning, we're not done growing, and I firmly believe you have to re-show up. You get to show up every day fresh, and there are always going to be new experiences, and there might not always be a handbook for leadership. So that's where some of that growth comes in and the learning experiences. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I hope that that's an encouragement for the audience listening that we're never done. So in a sense, you're not really racing to a finish line so much as trying to better yourself day after day. Do you align with any of that?
Yeah, 100%. I practice what I call kaizen. I wrote about it in my first book, which is continuous improvement. And with anything you take on in life, as long as you're making small steps towards and some of those steps might be missteps, but you can make that correction. If you're making those steps, you'll accomplish a lot more in a few years than you think you ever would have, especially if you never start something. Because a lot of us, I think, read a lot of books, watch a lot of YouTube videos, watch a lot of courses, and we put off taking action because we think we're not ready. But for me, most of my learning has come from taking the action and taking those small steps, and then when I hit a roadblock, figuring out how to get around it or through it or over it or under it or however I need to navigate that roadblock.
That's a great testament to resilience and resourcefulness too. I'm sure that you developed those skills along the way. Before we get into anything that's practical or tactical in nature, did you have a moment of epiphany when you realized that it starts with you and that you had to work on yourself, or was there something back in your earlier career days or maybe in the military where you had this moment of, oh wow, I have to be working on myself, I have to be strengthening this muscle if I'm going to lead people and lead ideas and projects and teams?
I think it goes back to my childhood. My childhood was very chaotic. I was very poor, lived in a single wide trailer with a mother that was addicted to pain meds, and the cops were always coming over. People were always getting in fights. It's very chaotic. And I had this drive to get out of my environment, to not become a product of my environment. And because of that drive, I realized I had to take ownership of what I want to do in life and getting myself out of this environment. So I used to have a lot of resentment about my childhood, but now I'm kind of grateful because I think it gave me a foundation of resilience, a foundation of risk taking, because I lived in a very unsafe, unstructured, unstable environment, and I became resilient because of it. And then, after I got out of that environment, I sought all the things I didn't have, but then later I had to unravel that and realize, I really don't need this stability. I don't need this 9 to 5 job. I don't need this, false sense of security or this safety. So I'm going to quit my 9 to 5, start a business, go skydiving, do all these things that I really wanted to do that I think were part of my identity, but I swung too far the opposite way when I got out of my childhood, basically.
Wow, that is a really powerful testimony and story. I didn't even know when asking it just how much resilience you have built up, but that is so inspiring. And I know that it might sound scary for a lot of us. I'm sure you had a lot of different moments along the way that brought you there too. But do you have any advice for anyone that is maybe on the verge at the cusp of making some really scary decisions like that, or taking really big risks, that you could help guide them through that?
For me, I try to focus on building resilience. That's one of the reasons I do difficult things, and building resourcefulness. I feel like the more resourceful you are, the more capable you're handling any situation. For someone looking to take a step in a different direction, I think one of the things a lot of us are lacking is clarity on what we want to do. And if we don't have clarity, it's hard to take the steps because we don't know what the steps are. So I would advise people to spend some time and figure out exactly the direction you want to go, the relationship you want to have, the amount of money you want to have, and then figure out some steps to get there, and be okay knowing that those steps might be a little bit of a misstep. But now you know that this direction isn't the right one to go. But you can't predict the whole journey ahead of time. You often just see like the first step, and that step will illuminate the next step and the next step. But that's part of the process, and that's what I try to do in my life, because I have a lot of ambitions, and I just take a step and then learn about the next step. And then after that step, learn about the next one, and realize, maybe this isn't even the path I want to go on. Maybe I should try a different path. But I don't know that until you take those steps and just practice that Kaizen, like I mentioned before, just that continuous and never ending improvement. Just make those small improvements every day, and you'll accomplish much more in a few years than you ever thought possible.
That's really great advice. And it's what you were saying earlier about taking action. And that action can be smaller steps. It doesn't have to be one giant leap out of a hot air balloon or one giant leap from an airplane. It can be smaller steps to get you there. And so I think that's really helpful for anyone who might be feeling lost. We're recording this in January, and it's that time of year when people are setting resolutions, they're setting goals, and sometimes we're looking at some really big, crazy goals ahead of us, and we can lose the forest for the trees if we aren't mindful of taking those small actions. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, something else I
Um,
do is it's not enough just to have these goals or have the clarity. You have to schedule it in your day. And that I use time blocks. So I'll block off an hour or 2 hours on my calendar to work on my next book, or work on the roadmap for my business, or work on sales for my business, or whatever that thing is. Work on becoming a better person, a better spouse, whatever it is. But you have to schedule it in your day. Otherwise, you'll never find the time. The time just doesn't show up. So I think that's extremely important. Just schedule that hour a day. Get up a little bit earlier, skip some of the television, maybe even 30 minutes. But then if you schedule it every day at the end of the week, even if it's 30 minutes, that's what is that? My math isn't that good. I grew up in Arkansas. That's like 5 hours, right? Or 2.5 hours, I think, right? Or three and
yeah,
a half hours. So,
it,
yeah.
that's a great point, because I myself have fallen into this. You think that you do need to bite off a huge chunk of progress versus taking the smaller bites along the way. And you're going to probably, whether it's learning, whether it's making progress, you're probably going to feel a lot more ease versus the burnout, or the law of diminishing returns. If we're trying to work extra on something and we spend, you know, X amount of hours a day doing it versus, trying to overwhelm our body and our mind with pulling an all-nighter, then we're setting ourselves up for failure versus success, right? If we're not managing our time.
Yeah. And for me, sometimes I tell myself, I'm going to work on my book this whole weekend. And then I'm dreading it because it's a big commitment, like you were alluding to. So then I would say, I'm just going to work on my book for an hour on Saturday morning. And just because I reduce the commitment, I'm more likely to stick to the hour. But then after the hour, like 3 hours go by. I've got much more progress. But if I would have tried to say I'm going to work on it the entire day, I probably would have avoided it altogether. So just saying 1 hour, is something it's more manageable. And as human psychology, it's a little easier to commit to an hour than an entire day on something.
Absolutely. Those are really great points. We're all getting on our calendars for the year too. How much do you plan in advance for yourself versus time block for a week. And we've all seen the giant calendars. I'm a big planner, but at the same time, I know the map is not the territory, and we could plan out for a full year, but things are going to shift and pivot. So, how do you like to map out your goals for longer stretches of time?
Yeah, I have the goals for the year, and then I have it for the quarter, and then I have it for the month. But then, as far as like the daily planning, I'm really only a month out with that, and typically like 3 weeks out because something always shifts on the calendar. But I try to put the big things in the calendar that I want to get done that quarter every week in the calendar, or that month every week in the calendar. Otherwise, I'm going to miss those targets. I'm not going to work on those things. That's especially important. Like for me, I'm trying to finish 2 books, and I got a little bit off track in November and December, but now I'm scheduling time to finish those books. I'm like 90% done with them, and it's just a matter of dedicating the time. Another thing is once you step away from something for a while, you have to spend all that time catching back up to where you were, and that's a lot longer slog than just doing it, an hour a day or 30 minutes a day.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And great that you highlight, sometimes we're going to get off track, but it's still within our power to realign our time and figure out a new game plan. We can be flexible and still meet our goals too. Um, I think it's just really impressive, Christian, that you're writing 2 books at once. That is amazing. But I want to talk about your book, The Smartest Person in the Room, a little bit, and hear why you wrote that and what was the impetus behind it.
I wrote that book because of my first cybersecurity company, which I started in 2014 and sold in 2020. I was getting frustrated, and I realized that 99% of the problems I had in my company were because my staff lacked emotional intelligence. In cybersecurity and other high tech industries, there's very super smart people, like rationally intelligent, high IQ, but often like low EQ or no EQ or no emotional intelligence. So I had a decision. I was like, I can get out of the industry because it's very frustrating, or I can try to do something about it. So I took a lot of training myself. I did some neurolinguistic programming training. I went to a lot of personal development events. I improved my own emotional intelligence. And then I worked with my staff, my team, to improve their emotional intelligence. We had people come in to train. We did training every Thursday. And the things that worked are what I ended up writing about in the book. And overall, this helped my team collaborate better. It helped us grow because clients liked us better because the touch points were more sincere, and my staff actually connected with some of our clients, so that we went from transactions to relationships, from like one-off projects to annual contracts, and it really helped my business. And I feel like if I didn't do that, I may not have been able to sell my business.
Wow. It, I've heard of other leaders training their team in that capacity, and the kind of greater impact that it can have internally as well as externally. I love that you documented it and wrote it down for other people to benefit from too. And that sort of brings me to my next question. Do you feel like that communication element is a challenge in the tech world for a lot of folks, or was that something that you see as super maybe niche to cybersecurity, especially because of certain ways that you work or normally interact?
I think it's a challenge in cybersecurity and other high-tech industries, and I think the challenge stems from the fact that everyone wants to feel significant. And in cybersecurity in high tech industries, people typically feel significant by being what they perceive as smarter than other people. And their ego protects this identity they created for themselves by talking over somebody's head. Because if you talk over someone's head and they don't understand you, it makes you feel smarter than them. Uh, and this is the problem I tried to solve in my company, because one of my staff members one day said, he was talking about a client, and he was explaining to the client the results of one of our reports. And he kept saying that the client just didn't get it. And I'm like, if the client doesn't get it, they're not going to become more secure, and they probably won't want to do business with us again, because they want to feel appreciated and understood. But my staff was so busy, this individual trying to prove how smart he was, he didn't alter his communication for the client. And one of the things I learned in NLP is one of the presuppositions is that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you're not receiving the response, like the client's not getting it, the ownership shifts back to you to alter how you communicate. And what we typically do is just blame the other person, like, oh, they're just not smart enough, or oh, they just don't know this, or they didn't read about that, or they didn't watch the news, versus alter how we communicate. And that was a pretty big pivotal shift I had to make in my company, to ask my staff, my team, to put themselves in the other person's shoes and communicate in a way that would resonate with them through their lens. And that really helped in my organization. It also helped having people take ownership of how they communicate. And this doesn't just help professionally, it helps in all aspects of your life.
I agree. And I feel like it gets back to what you were saying at the very beginning about self awareness and taking self ownership. If we're going to lead ourselves best, we have to have that awareness. If we're an individual or a team working with a client and we need to improve our communication, we have to have the awareness about it to begin with, to know that we have to improve. So it's really admirable that you were able to identify that with them, and then they also received the feedback. I'm curious, was there any kind of exercise or framework, or any type of maybe training specifically that helped them kind of click and understand how better to phrase or guide or educate clients?
Yeah, we did a lot of training on communication. I had third party trainers come in and do exercises with my staff. We had role play exercises where I would ask my staff to explain something to a doctor, because a lot of clients were doctors or physicians, for protecting HIPAA data. So we went through a lot of training. In what I realized though is not everybody was on board with the training. Some people were so adamant about not changing their identity that they didn't want to evolve, and those people I let go from the company. And then I started evaluating people based on their adherence to our core values. The core values were things along the lines I talked about. One of them was about communication. To listen carefully and respond clearly was one of our core values. And a lot of people didn't want to do that. So I had to enforce the culture, like, okay, you're not listening to what the person is telling you. You're just blabbing on and on. And that's not one of our core values. So you either have to fix this or you have to find a different job. So I evaluated people not just on their technical skills, but on their core value alignment. And then new people I brought on, I brought them on only if they were a good cultural fit. And then if they're a good cultural fit, then I looked at their technical skills. Before, I just looked at their technical skills, their certification, their degree, and I ignored all those other things. But I flipped the script on that and only looked at the technical skills, the degree, the certifications later after they passed everything else.
That's great to hear, Christian, because you can typically, right, teach or help people get to that higher level in their hard skills. But if they don't align with values, culture, if they're going to push back and fight against any kind of good positive changes for the better, then it can really drag down the rest of the team or company. So that's another risk, I think, for you to take as a leader, and really helpful in the long run for the whole team. But it can feel a little bit risky, I'm sure, when you have to identify who maybe isn't on board. How do you have a conversation with someone like that and help them to realize, maybe we're separating our paths here, maybe this isn't the best fit for you right now?
I've had to have a lot of those conversations. I remember one of them specifically. There's a guy in my company I had considered bringing on as a partner at one point, and he wanted to be a leader in the company. He wanted to be a partner in the company, but he had this habit of making everybody feel small and stupid. around him. Again, he had that, I'm smarter than everybody, significance, ego thing going on. So I had a conversation with him. I said, these are the traits I need you to develop in order to become a leader in my company. One of them is empathy, how to communicate better, how to make people feel understood and appreciated, just a number of things. And he said to me, he's like, so you're asking me to change who I am? He got defensive. And I thought about it. I said, yes, I'm asking you to change who you are because who you are will not work in the role you want. So if you want to become a leader, a partner in my company, you have to shift your identity. And he got super defensive about it, made it sound like I wasn't accepting him, and ended up leaving the company.
Hmm. That's a hard conversation to have, but I'm curious after having that, did you feel a sense of relief? Did it change the dynamic of the team?
I had a sense of relief, but I also had a little bit of a feeling of guilt. I'm a proponent of ownership, and I think I go a little bit overboard with it sometimes, and think if this person wants to make it to another level in my company, I take ownership of that and try to mentor them, try to coach them, try to help them to achieve their goal, right? But I had to realize that not everyone is ready. A lot of people say they want something, but they're not ready to do the work or put the time in or make the changes, and that is not my fault. So I do the best to set up the scenario and the opportunities for them to change, but they have to grab onto it and really want to do the work. And from my experience, most people talk about things but don't actually want to put the work in or the time in.
Mm. It it must be a feeling. This might be too much of a general assumption, but it sounds like it's a feeling that those of us who do take that extreme kind of ownership when we are responsible for people, because we're talking about leadership, and as a leader we're responsible for our people, it is that kind of gray area of wanting to take that full responsibility for their growth. But on the other hand, like you're saying, they have to do the work and they have to put the effort in for themselves in the same way that we're taking that self improvement and putting in the work on ourselves too. And I can understand and see how challenging that can be when you're met with someone who is willing to put in the work and is really hungry for more growth and development. What are some tips or advice that you like to give them in order to encourage them and help them keep that momentum or keep that drive for themselves?
I like to get to the root cause, like what is driving them and what's their intention is. Because if they just want to make more money or just have a different title, as soon as something challenging comes up, they're probably gonna say this is not for me. So I will ask people. There's a exercise. It's called the 7 levels deep exercise. You basically ask somebody why something 7 times, and I have them do that on their own. But the idea is you get to the root issue, like what am I really trying to do, and why do I want to do it, and why do I want to do that, and you just keep asking yourself these questions. And a lot of people, when they don't actually have an answer, and I think it's hard to make changes and it's hard to shift your identity if you don't understand what's driving you and why you want to get there and why you want to make this change. So I do that, and then I try to make myself available as much as possible because I have no problem if somebody in my company wants to start their own business, as long as it's not like directly competitor to me. I support that. I support fellow entrepreneurs. I support people trying to fulfill their life ambition or this thing they want to do in their life. And I'm very supportive of that because I think a lot of people didn't support me because when I first started my first business, all my friends were like, "You're crazy, leaving your 9 to 5 job. You're gonna fail. 80% of businesses fail. You're gonna lose all your money." And like I didn't have a lot of support, so I want to do my best to support fellow entrepreneurs and fellow leaders because I think our country needs more of that. I think we have a shortage of it.
I love that. And well, that's one of the reasons why you're here, Christian, to be able to share your passion for that and help inspire others, because I see that shortage too. And I'm curious, where do you think that shortage comes from? Where do you think we're missing the mark there?
I think it comes from a lot of fear, uh, and a lot of the social media presence. Because now, if you fail, what you might perceive as failure, more people are going to know. In the older days, it might be your three neighbors and your two friends, but now it's like your 5,000 Facebook friends might think, "Oh, I'm going to start a business. Oh, I that failed miserably, and now I'm back doing this." And people might ask you a question about it. So I think there's some fear around it, and there's also some, I believe, brainwashing. I think college and in certain programs like brainwash you to want to do a specific thing and say this is the definition of success. You go to college, you get a degree, you get a 9 to 5 job for Amazon or Microsoft or whatever. Get married, buy the house with a mortgage, get a car that you can't afford, and have a payment on that. And we've been indoctrinated with these things, and we feel like if we don't do those things, we're not going to be successful. But success is a very personal thing, and I think we need to like silence the noise of our parents, our friends, our acquaintances, our institutions, our politicians, and just tune in to ourselves and ask ourselves, what do I want? And if we silence that noise and tune in, I feel like you'll have the answer. The challenge is silencing that noise and cutting out the distractions. So for me, my gut has never been wrong. When I've asked myself what I should do, and my gut said you should get rid of that person, for instance, when I've like logically rationalized not to get rid of the person, it caused me more problems. But I have a hard time loosening to my gut sometimes. But my gut has always been right.
Oh, I love that. And wow, you're right. Social media, for all of its benefits, there's the con, the fault of feeling like everybody is watching us, and everybody's opinion holds the same weight or value too. When nobody has the secret to your success, we can get advice left, right, and center. But I love that you're leaning on your own intuition and that gut, because to your point too, if society or people that came before us in some capacity are outlining the expected steps that we have to take, go to college, get the job, get the house, like you're saying, then it will set us up for a lot of disappointment. And then we are going to fail if we don't follow that plan. But I love what you were talking about earlier when you were saying that you take a step and you don't necessarily know what is after that step, and you're willing to try and experiment, and just how cool that is. And yes, it feels very risky, but at the same time very exciting. What do you how do you feel about that when you take those
Yeah,
steps?
I feel like that is exciting. Like you said, for me, it's a zest for life. I'm doing something I don't quite fully know, but I'm learning along the way, and I'm evolving along the way, and I'm taking the journey. To me, that's important. And then what we were talking about earlier, and your social media, your friends. I think it's also important if you want to make a change in your life or follow your dream, which might be unique, to find people that support you. Like your friends that, like the friends I had that didn't want me to start a 9 to 5, those people aren't my friends anymore because I don't want people like that in my life pulling me down. And I spent a lot of time in Ireland during COVID, and there's this thing in Ireland called the tall poppy syndrome. And I think a lot of people fall under this category. So the whole concept is if a poppy plant grows taller than the other ones, people want to cut it down, right? Versus make another poppy grow taller. And I think it's the same on social media. People want to see you fail more than succeed because if you fail, it gives them justification not to go after their own dreams. So find better friends on social media that want to see you succeed and want to help you succeed.
Yes, that is really impactful imagery there, and I've never heard of that, but I'm going to remember that, because I can see that, you can see it just in comments that other people will try and tear down folks online. And maybe we're always looking for an argument. We love the controversy that we get, and the negativity, and it can really be challenging to say, hey, I need to improve, or I need to work on something, and follow my own path, I would add, because you might have a lot of potential there, but your poppy could be different from somebody else's poppy, in the sense that we're all unique, and we all have a lot of different gifts. And we if we're trying to follow the same kind of route or path that somebody else has set, we really can't. And we're going to be met with more disappointment there if we're trying to mimic someone else. That's my own personal feeling. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that either.
I think it's okay to look at other people that have succeeded that are further along the path that you have, and try to shortcut your journey to get there. But like you said, you may want to do it a little bit differently. That's just how they did something. Doesn't mean you have to follow the exact same path, and that requires some trust in yourself and some confidence in yourself. Which I think confidence comes from taking that first step, and that gives you some confidence, which is then feeds the confidence to take the next step. It's like you take a step, get some confidence, you figure out the lay of the land, then you take the next step once you have the confidence. It's like this process, and it's not like a light switch that just comes on and everything is illuminated. You have to take those steps, and that's part of the excitement, but it's also part of the, I guess, scariness for some people, because the next step you may not know what's beyond there. But I guess at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself: so I want to live a exciting life where I feel like I went for things, or I want to live a comfortable status quo life. And to me, I look at my life from the perspective, if I'm on my deathbed and I ask myself, do I have regrets? I want the answer to always be no. And I've read a lot of books about people dying, and almost every single person has regret, regret, regret. They didn't leave their 9 to 5 job. They didn't marry that woman. They didn't, move to a different, sunny location versus from the winter. Whatever it is, they have regrets, and I don't want to have regrets when I'm on my deathbed. That's a lens I look at when I'm deciding, should I take that step in this direction. If my answer is, well, if I don't, I'm probably gonna have a regret, then I'm gonna take the step.
That's a great mindset, and really, really inspiring, Christian. You mentioned steps too, and that kind of system that we can build for ourselves. You also have a 7-step secure methodology. Is that something that we can apply to our own improvement? Is that something that we can apply to our teams too?
100%. You can apply it to your own improvement and your team. The 7 steps are what I wrote about in my book, The Smartest Person in the Room. I can briefly go through the 7 steps if you'd like. Yeah, the first step, we've kind of talked about it, is awareness. This is self-awareness, not awareness of what other people are doing, but self-awareness. And I tie neuro linguistic programming into the book quite a bit. And one of the things that we don't realize is our brains have these programs in them. And we have a stimulus, we automatically run the program. We like to think we're very unpredictable. We're not. So we have to ask ourselves at the end of the day, if we have this stimulus and I run this program, which is my behavior, is that behavior helping me or hindering me? An example I have with my staff: somebody asks him a question, he automatically get defensive. So instead of getting defensive, a better behavior would be maybe get curious and ask a question in return to understand where they're coming from. So that's installing a new behavior. And having that awareness is extremely important in order to change. The second step is mindset. With mindset, you want to have a growth mindset. We want to believe our brains are malleable, they're not hardwired, and we can learn new things. If we can't learn new things, it doesn't matter how, if we believe we can't learn new things, it doesn't matter how much awareness we have. We have to be able to do something with that awareness. The third step is acknowledgement. As a leader, I think it's important to acknowledge yourself as well as your team. Something I struggle with my whole life, and I still struggle with it quite a bit, is acknowledging myself for things I've done. I remember in 2005, I stood on the Ironman World Championship finish line. I'd never done an Ironman, and I told myself, someday I'm going to do this race. In 2015, I did the race. I crossed the finish line. The announcer was saying my name and everything, and I was automatically thinking about the next big thing to do. I never once said, this took me 10 freaking years to accomplish. I never once patted myself on the back and I thought, man, if I can't acknowledge something that took me 10 years, I'm probably doing a horrible job acknowledging my team and my spouse and my friends or anybody around me. So I really had to work on that. The fourth step we talked about is communication, and that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So again, that shifts the ownership on you to alter how you communicate. In cybersecurity, people always talk about how they never get the budget. But I've been to a lot of these meetings, and it's just techno babble that doesn't relate to anybody in that room, the conference room, that is making a decision for the business. So again, they need to alter how they communicate. And the fifth step is a controversial step. It's a monotasking, which is the opposite of multitasking. I think multitasking is kind of like parachute pants. Is very antiquated and ridiculous. It makes you like, if anybody puts they're a great multitasker, I will not hire that person. That tells me that person is very busy but not very productive, and they're also very stressed out. So monotasking is doing what we talked about earlier, putting a block of time on your calendar and just doing that one thing. You'll make much more progress with concentrated focus. So if I'm going to work on my book, I don't check Slack, I don't answer my phone, I don't check my text messages. I only work on my book. And I make a lot more progress because it makes you productive when you do that. And you could do it for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever time works for you. The other thing that works with monotasking that it helps with is presence. In our society today, which is filled with distractions, we're rarely present. If I am out to dinner with my wife, now I just got married not too long ago. If I'm out to dinner with her and I'm monotasking, meaning I'm enjoying the conversation, I'm not checking my phone, I'm not thinking about something else, she's going to feel appreciated and understood. And it's going to be a much better dinner or conversation. And you've probably seen this. You go out to dinner with someone, or you see people at the restaurant, they're both of them are on the phone and nobody is actually present. And I always think, man, how what kind of dinner is this? What kind of like outing is this? Where's the human connection? Um, and if someone does that to me, if I'm talking, they pull out their phone and they're on their phone while I'm talking to them, I'll just stop talking because I'm like, I don't feel what I have to say is that important. The sixth step is empathy. I think today in our society, there's a lot of division. We're very quick to point out all these factions, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, Democrats, Republicans, whatever the factions are. And it's hard to be empathetic when you see a fellow human being as in a different group than you. You don't see them as a human being. You see them, oh, that's a liberal, or oh, that's a conservative, or oh, that's someone that likes guns, and versus someone that doesn't like guns. We only see that division, and it makes it hard to be empathetic. And for me, I had a moment that sort of like drove this home. A few years ago, I almost died with 6 blood clots in my left leg, and I went to the doctor. I was at the hospital, the emergency room, and I got this Doppler ultrasound done. The doctor comes out and he's like, "You got 6 blood clots." I'm like, "Okay." At this point, I was doing like Ironman triathlon. I was very fit. I didn't think people like me got blood clots. So I asked him what it meant, and he's like, "Well, it means you could die or have a stroke at any moment." And I started freaking out. I was there at the hospital by myself. This is in St. Louis. My nearest family member was in Denver, and I started like crying a little bit, like thinking, "Man, my life might be over." My like images of my life were going through my head, thinking, did I matter? Did I love? Did I take risk? And he saw me freaking out, and he said something I'll never forget. He said it in a very nonchalant way. He said, "Oh, don't worry. I see this all the time." That's what he told me. And I immediately snapped out of my sobbing, kind of like life flashing before my eyes moment. And I said, "You know what? I don't see this all the time. This is a first for me." And I think he was trying to be empathetic or compassionate, but he, again, that division, he saw himself as a doctor, me as a patient, versus I'm a fellow human being that just got some pretty, devastating news. And if he would have looked at it through that lens, he may have reacted differently. The last step is Kaizen. we talked a little bit about this, is that constant and never ending improvement. It's taking the first step and developing the courage to know this might be a little bit of a misstep, but now I know more. I'm more informed that I can take another step. We tend to think we can do a lot more in a short period of time than we can, but if we take these incremental steps and make these incremental improvements over like several years, we'll accomplish a lot more than we ever thought possible.
Christian, I love those steps, all seven of them. And I know we're coming to the end of our time. The one about just being fully present and not being on your phone, especially, makes me think of something I read recently. It said we're on average spending about 20 years of our life on our phone. And that was such a staggering piece of data and thought for me that I even put it in my calendar, at the top of my calendar every day. It's don't spend 20 years on your phone.
That's a good reminder. Yeah.
So, and I see it now on my phone. So if I pick up my phone in the morning, I'm like, okay, I have my reminder to actually get off my phone. And I love all seven of those steps, because you're outlining all of what I consider to be the essentials for not just being able to grow and improve, but having a really great, fulfilling life too. And that speaks to your mindset of having no regrets at the end of it. So thank you for sharing all of that with us, Christian. It's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to have you and have your insight and your wisdom. Thank you so much to all of our listeners for tuning in too. Christian, I want to make sure that they have a chance to connect with you and catch your next books too. What are the titles of your next books that are coming out?
My next book is one of them is on medical device cybersecurity. My company, Blue Goat Cyber, we specialize on medical device cybersecurity. So in order to solidify myself and my company in the market, I'm almost done with a book on that. So we've got a podcast, a webinar, a book. We're trying to I'm trying to take over the market, and I do a lot of speaking on that topic. My other book, I haven't quite landed on a title, but it's really about the story we tell ourselves and asking ourselves about the inner narrative. Is it supporting us or is it hindering us? And then how to change that story. And I relate it to things that I've done to change the story, because I get trapped in my own story sometimes. But I think it's important to shift that story. My books are available. My first two books are available on Amazon and on Audible. I had Kaleo Griffith narrate my books. He did Trump's The Art of the Deal and one of the Tim Ferriss's books. And then people can get a hold of me pretty much on any social media: Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. My personal website is christianespinoza.com, and my company website is bluegoatcyber.com.
That's so awesome, Christian. Thank you again for sharing all that with us. Everybody, go visit Christian online wherever you find him. We'll have the links below. And thank you again for listening and tuning in to another episode of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders, the podcast.